Welcome. Welcome to the second night of the University Lecture Series. It's great to see everybody here. It's great to see a full house. I'm really excited about what we're going to see tonight. What we're going to hear are three different takes on the idea of in the creative mind. Like signature courses, what we hope to do is introduce you to the breadth and the reach that you can have when you're thinking about an important idea. We're going to hear about how you can have a poem be viewed in a subversive way. We're going to hear about the importance of handling and reading original manuscripts. And we're going to hear about the thought process involved in a brilliant innovation. A very important lesson that I hope you take away from tonight is what it means to be at a major research university. The University of Texas at Austin has great scholars in just about every discipline you've ever heard of and a lot you've never even heard of before. We're not just teachers, we create new knowledge. So tonight, you're going to be hearing from people who not only teach, but they also change the way people think about their own fields. So before I go on and on about the accolades of these individuals, every time someone comes up on stage, you'll be able to read about who they are and what they've done. Our first speaker tonight is Dean Young.
Hi. In the previous century, after I graduated from college, I was a poet in the schools for a short time in Indiana for 3 years. And what that program did is it put young writers in high schools and grade schools to help teach writing to children and high school students. And there was a student in a second grade named Dustin Eggink, how could I forget that name, who wrote this poem. It was called Writing Poetry. All the clouds saying, come on, think up something good. Art teaches us to pay attention, and attention is an art. The first thing I'd like to talk about tonight is receptivity. The notion that art, insight, consciousness, change in consciousness, does not necessarily come purely from within. That you look out into the world, and that's where the materials of art are. And one of the things that is in the world is poetry, the poetry of other writers. One of the things that I noticed when I was teaching young kids is that everybody up until about the 3rd or 4th grade is a poet. They know that the basis of language is poetic. Language was given to us to make poems. In Western civilization, our first written records are things that say like 2 donkeys, a bale of hay, 4 urns. Some people say they're bills of sales, but they're not. They're poems. As long as language has been around, it has been poetic. It has been used for poetry. Emerson said that language is fossil poetry. And to write poems, you're already collaborating with a genius. And that genius is the language. It's right there. Probably many of you have been tortured with this short poem by William Carlos Williams in high school classes, or you will be soon in your English classes. It's very simple. It goes, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. It's kind of at first it seems like a koan. How can anything depend upon this wheelbarrow? Williams insisted that it wasn't symbolic. He wasn't saying that this is a symbol for agricultural the agricultural importance of a productive farm for the life of the country. The secret is in so much depends upon it. And what depends upon it? One thing that depends upon it is the poem itself. But another thing that depends upon it is our being. Our being, our consciousness is dependent upon focusing on the exterior world. And when we do that kind of focus, extraordinary things can happen. Here's a poem by James Wright. It's called Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's Farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. What could be more relaxed than that, right? Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly asleep on the black trunk, blowing like a leaf in green shadow. The cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. As I lean back, as the evening darkens and comes on, a chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. Everything up until the very last moment of that poem, the last sentence, which is also the last line of the poem, is about looking out, seeing things. He sees a butterfly, he hears cowbells, he sees horse droppings, he sees a hawk flying overhead. It's all about being in the sensorium. And then there's this switch, this consciousness of his own being. I have wasted my life. Now we can interpret that line in a number of ways. One way to think is that wasting your life is what he has been doing, just looking at stuff, and it's a good thing to do. A mind is a beautiful thing to waste. So I'd like to move from talking about receptivity to thinking about surprise. How if you pay attention to things, surprises happen. Apollinaire, the great French poet of the 20th century, one of the greatest poets of all time, French poet, and the French, after all, in art, invented the 20th century for us, said that surprise was the basic ingredient for art. And what surprise is an indication of realization. It's an indication that the consciousness we have so far is insufficient to the task, and that brings about a new consciousness. Art is about the business of creating consciousness, of bringing more consciousness into the world, of making the world bigger. The poem itself is an apparatus of discovery. And here's where the reading of poetry and the writing of poetry really overlap. Poems are instruction manuals. They're instruction manuals about how to change your consciousness, about how to find collaboration with this sense that we all have, that what surrounds us, our daily lives, can't be all there is. There is something else. We subtract everything and there's still some unaccountable remainder. There's something unverifiable and extra, something magical. The Japanese poet Issa, roughly his life span overlaps Thomas Jefferson's, wrote a poem, a haiku, and you all know that the haiku is a very, very restrictive form of 17 syllables in Japanese. The Japanese language is so different from English that there's no such thing as a haiku in English. But this is a translation of his haiku. It begins by saying, "The world of dew is the world of dew." Now, particularly in Zen Buddhism, the notion that the world is fleeting all the time. The world is like dew, right? It's gone. It's here, it's beautiful, it's tactile, and then it's beautiful, and then in an instant it's gone. So we know that. The world of dew is the world of dew. And then the poem says, and yet, and yet. It's an extraordinary poem when you think of such a short form that it's made up of 2 repetitions. The world of dew is the world of dew, and yet, and yet. That's one of those poems that I just die with envy over. But the and yet, the initial and yet says there is something unaccountable. That even if we say, yes, the world around us is just fleeting, it's an illusion, it's going to be gone in a second. Yeah, we all agree on that, but that's not sufficient. There's something more. And then that second and yet is like bragging and saying, not only is there a little more, but it turns out to be a lot more. It's like dark matter. Every time I turn around, I feel like they're piling on more dark matter to make sense of things. I wish I had recourse to dark matter when I balance my checkbook. I got 180 minus 230. I just make up for the rest of that with dark matter. So I'm going to read you one of my own poems. And this is a poem about that sense of there being something more. And in this poem, I call it magic. And the end of this poem refers to a rather drastic medical procedure I had done a little over 2 years ago. The poem is called Belief in Magic. How could I not have seen a man walk up to a piano and both survive, have turned the exterminator away, seen lipstick on a wine glass not shatter the wine, seen rainbows in puddles, been recognized by stray dogs. I believe reality is 65% if. All rivers are full of sky. Waterfalls have minds. We all come from slime, even alpacas. I believe we're surrounded by crystals, not just Alexander Vidensky, who's a Russian poet. Maybe dysentery, maybe a guard's bullet did him in. Nevertheless, I believe there are many kingdoms left. The Declaration of Independence was written with a feather. A single gem has throbbed in my chest my whole life, even though this is my second heart. Because the first failed, such was its opportunity, was cut out in pieces and incinerated. I asked, and so was denied the chance to regard my own heart in a jar. Strange tangled imp, we slick it in red brambles. You know what it feels like to hold a burning piece of paper, maybe even trying to read it as the flame gets close to your fingers until all you're holding is a curl of ash by its white ear tip, yet the words still hover in the air. That's how I feel now. Thank you.
You know, I think there is absolutely nothing like hearing a poem read by the poet. I mean, that was fantastic. I don't think there's any doubt that we have a creative mind up here. What we're going to talk about next is Tom Staley is going to tell us about what it's like to actually talk to, read about, think about an original manuscript.
How are you? Henry James once spoke about the imagination as well, and someone asked him about it, and he said, you know, it is a matter, a typical James sentence, it is a matter the full consideration of which would carry us far. Well, I don't know I'm going to carry you very far tonight with this imagination, but I do want to say a few things about the Ransom Center and about manuscripts and about what's available to you in this great university. And that's one of the great things about going to being part of a major research university, because there are all sorts of resources for you to see, and it's just a great opportunity. Libraries such as the Ransom Center are committed to collecting and making accessible the fruits of our culture. And for all we know, of course, much of the frontier of technological change is also housed at the Ransom Center. Technology and digitization provide us a medium for the message, a means to extend our range through all kinds of communications. In 2003, for example, we embarked on our first large-scale digitization project. We digitized our entire Gutenberg Bible. Now, that Bible had been there for 25 years, and many, many thousands of people had seen it. But there are only 5 in this country and 50 or 52 all that were ever printed. Now, complete copies in the United States, are, as I say, are 5, but we made it accessible on our website. And in the first month alone, our digitized Gutenberg received over 14 million hits online. Now, I can't imagine how long it would take us to have 14 million people come through the Ransom Center and see this. We probably know what else we'd get to go around the campus. Now, it remains a tremendously popular destination on the website to this day. Now, this is an effort that was to make something widely available. And you can see it, of course, in the lobby of the Ransom Center. Now, this brings up a question, doesn't it? What is the difference between seeing this as it would be on your computer or seeing it, touching it, and feeling it? Now, it's only fair to note that the great German philosopher Walter Benjamin did not live in the digital age. But if he were alive today, perhaps he would see things in a different philosophical context. But he believed that what was authentic and what was real had to be in the same time, in the same place. From our vantage point, Benjamin's remarks may seem, again, a little bit vague, because we examine, for example, the succession of drafts that lead to a published work. Our students become engaged with works, with writers, and with authors on a very intimate level. I'd like to just give you a few examples tonight of what this might mean. For example, when you're reading James Joyce's Ulysses, I'm sure you're all reading it every day, students can see the final page proofs of that work here at the Ransom Center. The last touches that Joyce made, struggling with this terrible vision problem that he had, and about to go blind, and yet there was this compulsive revision of nearly every page before he bundled up his 5th set of proofs and sent them from his Paris apartment to his printer in Dijon. The printer in Dijon was Italian, the book was in English, and it was done in France. It's lucky that it ever got published, and it was Ulysses. Now, in this form, one can feel and surely understand the almost obsessive care and driven energy of the artist. This encounter with the real, if nothing else, deepens the experience of the engagement, I think, and the aesthetic appreciation. Now, like all literary manuscripts, these materials have, as Philip Larkin once noted, 2 kinds of value, the magical and the meaningful. Beyond the thrill of the discovery is the shock of recognition in the student as he or she engages with the authentic object and comes to understand more fully the creative process. And, of course, in that, the writer's imagination. These are the false starts. These are the changes that are made. Joyce made 26% of Ulysses was changed in the margins. of the different various stages of the page proof. Now, it was a mess, that manuscript. If you want to see it, it's good to look at those final pages. Now, research libraries such as the Ransom Center are committed to strengthening and supporting and celebrating the humanities, not just for university students and scholars, but also for a greater public and also for history. To that end, we collect and we preserve the creations of our cultural heritage. And be they books, be they manuscripts, be they archives, be they artwork, be they photographs, or born digital materials, and correspondence, of course. But these items are more than mere artifacts to us. We believe that they have a life unto themselves, one that can be imparted only if they're engaged, one that can be imparted only if students and scholars and readers are there. They are the trail that the author leaves behind, the map that traces the trajectory of the imagination. It is this material that tells the story of a work of literature or art, its provenance, its evolution in its final form. Don Delillo, who is one of the most important contemporary American novelists and a writer whose archive, I must say, resides at the Ransom Center, said in an interview in the Paris Review, quote, he was an old ball player, by the way, you'll get that image here. Discarded pages mark the physical dimensions of a writer's labor. You know how many shots it took to get a certain paragraph right. The first draft of my novel, Libra, sits in 10 manuscript boxes. It's the complete book. It's the full experience containable on paper. And now it's here at the Ransom Center. This complete book is available for study. We provide access to the living record of the creative process to anyone who wants to gain a better understanding of art, of culture, of literature, of history, and the humanities. Now, I say this without apology, for this is clearly our mission. I'll leave you this evening with two rather brief stories. Many years ago, when our university-wide library catalog first went online, a freshman looking for a copy of The Great Gatsby found one listed in the Ransom Center's online catalog. It said HRC. So he said, well, whatever that is, I'll find it. So he went up to the reading room of the Ransom Center, not knowing that he couldn't check it out or that it was a first edition with a very rare dust jacket, I might add. It was, at the time, probably worth $50,000 or $60,000. So the librarian was a bit concerned when this freshman was reading it, and then especially when he came back the second day. And, you know, in the library world or in the rare book world, a book that's brand new, perfect, is called mint. And after it's been read once, it becomes VG, very good, and it goes downhill from there. So you can see why the librarians were a little bit nervous about this. I recently saw that book quoted, signed copy, in a bookseller's catalog for $185,000. Now, the student, you can see why the librarians were a bit nervous. They called me and said, there's a student here reading this book, and he keeps reading it and reading. And I said, did he take the dust jacket off? Oh, yeah, the dust jacket's off. So he was there at one of the tables in the reading room. And he came back for 3 successive days to continue reading this rare edition. And when he finished the book, one of the librarians asked him what he was studying. Oh, I'm just reading the book for a class, he said. I didn't want to have to buy a copy. Now, clearly, we don't advocate the use of our rare books in this manner, but for this student, the experience of reading this edition made a great impression on him. Many years later, this young reader, now a very successful computer entrepreneur and a book collector, I might add, sent us a package. Came to me, I opened it, and I found the box filled with signed first editions of Cormac McCarthy and Graham Greene. He said, I want to give these books to the Ransom Center in gratitude for introducing me to the world of rare books. He said, all I like now are first editions, and here are some for you. Now, the moral of this story is not that we should encourage undergraduates to study from first editions and manuscripts so that they will, as you might, later stock up our rare book room with gifts. Rather, it demonstrates that a book is not simply an object, not merely a source of information. A book can be something that transcends these definitions and becomes an inspiration for students, for scholars, and readers. 3 years ago, we acquired the archive of the writer André Debus, who, along with Raymond Carver, is credited with resuscitating the American short story in the 1980s. Brilliant writer. Let me read from a letter we received a few months later from his son, the novelist André Debus III. Dear Dr. Staley, as the second of my father's 6 children, and on behalf of them all, I want to thank the Ransom Center for offering to house and care for our father's archive. Since he was a boy in neighboring Louisiana, he had dreamed of being a writer. By the end of his life, he had become one of the country's finest practitioners of the short story. I was a student at UT Austin and graduated in 1981. Pop would call me from Massachusetts, and he'd want to hear all about Austin. He was listening to a lot of Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson then, and when I graduated, I bought him a Hook 'em Horns tank top to work out in. I also sent him a Longhorns Dad bumper sticker he then stuck to the back of his writing chair. Sometimes I'd walk into his room before he was finishing working, and I'd see my Longhorn father hunched over the desk, writing slowly in pen into a second notebook, composing one of his masterful stories, all of which will now be in Austin. We know the Ransom Center will take better care of it, these great gems of his, than we ever could, and we're so grateful. Now, this letter is just, I think, a very human reminder that the papers, the books, the computer disks, the emails, the photographs we collect are all the products of the imagination of human beings. And the libraries that house and make available most materials are true fountains of learning. Now, we also, at the Ransom Center, have gotten deeply involved in collecting film. We have a number of directors and films. We started out with Gone with the Wind years and years ago, but that's another area that has become extremely important in the study, especially in the humanities. And I think if you get a chance to look at some of these, for example, we got the storyboards recently of Rebel Without a Cause, and you probably remember that film. It's a great film, and students flock to that to look at it and study it. The other thing you might have read recently, we had acquired the Magnum archive of photojournalism. It's brilliant. And photography, which has emerged as a major, major genre, and it really inquires and tests the nature of what's going on in our culture and society, just as film does. So these are areas that are evolving for us every day. And for you, as you're here studying, you have an opportunity to see how these different genres grow and change and shift, mutate, if you will. And I think that's one of the great things about the learning experience. As our great poet who was here a moment ago, nothing is static. It's always changing, ever changing. And certainly we hope that that's what the Ransom Center is doing. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You know, you think about it, the Gutenberg Bible, first edition Gadsby, Rebel Without a Cause storyboard. The university has some truly remarkable treasures. In my mind, one of the absolute most precious is Michael Starbird.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and we're talking about creativity, and I wanted to just tell you how to do it. So I'm a very practical-minded person. So I'm from the Department of Mathematics, where, of course, creativity abounds. But I love stories, and some of the stories that I really like best are the stories about brilliant geniuses. Stories such as that an apple falls and Newton thinks of gravity and calculus. It's a great story. And Einstein jostles his hair, and relativity falls out. I love those stories. I love the stories that the great poets sit down and write wonderful poetry the first time through. The only trouble with those stories is I think they're wonderful stories, they're inspiring, but they're not true. That's not what causes people to think of great ideas. The reason people think of great ideas is because they have a method of thinking. They think in a very deliberate way that leads to creativity. The concept that creativity is magic and that it really is a matter of magical inspiration, that has two defects as a concept. The first problem is that it's wrong. That's a problem. It's simply wrong, that creativity comes from magical inspiration. The second defect is that it's useless. If you think that creativity comes from magical inspiration, the only thing that you can do if you want to come up with a creative idea is perhaps take a bunch of showers. Well, what else can you do? Hope for magical inspiration. That's not where creativity comes from, and it's not where success comes from. It turns out that creativity and success come from very deliberate practice, from strategies of thinking that you personally can do. The difference between the people who end up being the successes in life, between successes in school, successes and the geniuses who create wonderful works, and those who don't, the difference is who practices strategies that lead to success. I love these talks, by the way, that I heard from Dr. Staley was telling us about the drafts of these wonderful manuscripts. You can't hear a story like that where you see that 25% of the writing of Ulysses is altered in the margins and say to yourself, oh, here was this wonderful genius who got it right the first time, right? That's just not what happened. The final product looks finished. It's not finished. If you gave that to that same person for a few more years, you know what? 25% more would be changed. The genius comes from effort, and it's an effort that you personally can take. So let me give you some examples of strategies. I'm going to be very pragmatic here. Strategies of how to become more successful than you currently are. I was teaching a class once, I'm a professor of mathematics, and I was teaching a mathematics class to a bunch of liberal arts students. The first question I have to you is to ask you, why do you think these liberal arts students were taking this mathematics class? So on the count of three, I want you to tell me what the answer is. 1, 2, 3. That's right, it was required. So they were in class. So these students were all here, they were required to be there. And I was asking myself, well, what can I really give these students? Because they're going to forget all this math. So what am I going to give them that really will last a lifetime? And so I said to myself, well, if I could teach them to think better, then they could use that whatever it is that they do. And so I started to think about the question, could I get them to be smarter than they are? And so I just tried an experiment in class, and this is a true story. So this was an experiment in class. I came to a point that I was talking about a very difficult theorem in mathematics that I was trying to get across. And I decided to say, well, could they discover this on their own? Could they figure out this very difficult problem, basically, on their own, when it was far more difficult than they could possibly do? Could I help them to do that, not by telling them anything mathematical, but instead simply telling them strategies of using their own minds? So that was the challenge I set for myself. So the question came up, and I said to the class, okay, I want you to prove the following theorem. It was a theorem in mathematics. I wanted you to show something was true. And for those of you who are mathematically inclined, I'll tell you what it is, because I remember. It was to show that you can, it's really the shorthand way is to say the cardinality of the natural numbers is equal to the cardinality of the rational numbers. Now that wasn't too illuminating, so I'll tell you what that means. It means that you make a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put a fraction by the number 1, a fraction by the number 2, a fraction by the number 3, in such a pattern that eventually every single fraction will occur on that list. It's sort of amazing because there are infinitely many fractions between 0 and 1, infinitely many between 1 and 2, infinitely many. You would think there are just way too many fractions. It wouldn't work. So I told them. It turns out this is a difficult thing, but it's true. So I said, this is true. It's very difficult. It's way too hard. You can't do it. take 3 minutes, talk to your neighbors, and try to figure it out. And they said, wait a minute, if it's too hard, why are you telling me? I said, just shut up and do it, okay? 3 minutes later, they're working away. The only rule, there was a rule. The rule was that they were required to write something down. They're required to make a guess. After 3 minutes, I said, I don't ask for volunteers, I just point to people. And so I said, Mary was an art major. I said, Mary, what do you have? And she said, I couldn't do it. I said, I know you couldn't do it. It's way too hard. I knew you couldn't do it. Just tell me what you have. No. So I said, well, okay, one thing that we teach students very well in our educational system is to pretend to know more than they know and to never admit ignorance. We teach this to students, and she had learned that lesson. So she was unwilling to say. Finally, after several iterations of this dialogue, I said, you have to tell me what you said, and she said, okay. So she told me what she had, and I wrote it on the board. And I said, you're right, it's wrong. She was not happy, by the way. She was not happy. You're right, it's wrong. And I said, okay, can you tell me what is wrong? And by the way, what she did is she said 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, 1 over 4, 1 over 5. I said, can you tell me what's wrong? And she said, yeah, not all the fractions are ever going to appear. I said, great. Can you tell me a specific fraction that won't appear? A specific mistake that you made? She said, well, yeah, duh. 2/3 will never appear. I said, could you put 2/3 on the list? And she said, well, yeah, I could do that. I said, okay, take 3 more minutes and fix all the ones that you think you can. 3 minutes later, she had improved her answer. She had said, 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 3, then 2 over 3, 1 over 4, 3 over 4, 1 over 5, 2 over 5, 3 over 5. She had done this, and I said, what do you have? She said that. I wrote it down, back to Mary, by the way, nobody else. Everybody else is working on it, but I go back to Mary. I write it down on the board. And I said, are you done, Mary? And she said, yes, I got it. And then some other kid in the class says, wait a minute, you don't have the fractions where the bigger number's on top. And she said, shoot. Or words to that effect. And then I said, okay, take 3 more minutes and fix it. After 3 more minutes, she had fixed it. What she did, she put the reciprocals after each one. After 2/3, she put 3 over 2 and so on. She got all those. I said, and after 3 minutes, I said, what do you have? Mary again. She said, okay, I put the upside down ones after each one, and I wrote down. Do you have them all? Yes, she said. Another kid, you don't have the negative ones. I said, okay, 3 more minutes. She goes back, 3 more minutes. She puts the negatives after each positive one, and she has it correct. Now, I honestly believe if she had been in a jail cell and was going to be released only if she were able to solve this problem, she would be in jail today. And yet, the only contribution I made to her life, to her ability to do this, is to tell her to make a mistake, to actually write down something that was wrong and then look at it and learn from it. The reason people write drafts of things is not because they imagine the draft is perfect. It's because by looking at it, that's when they see what's wrong with it. You learn what the defects are. Defects are directive. They point you in the right direction. And if you learn from mistakes, it's one of the great lessons of life. The people who are writing wonderful things are doing it on the backs of a heap of failed attempts. Nobody has ever done anything creative that wasn't built on that heap of failure. So don't avoid the failure. Do it. That is part of your life lesson, is to learn from mistakes and to actively make those mistakes. In mathematics, that's the way you learn. Okay, that's one technique. Another technique is to actually understand things. When I heard Dean Young talking about poets looking at the world and actually describing this poem about a wheelbarrow and a red rose or something, chicken, a red chicken, a red wheelbarrow. I didn't think it was a red chicken. Okay, well, I got to write it down. The point is that it was grounded in reality. There was no fuzziness about it. And when I think about students in my mathematics classes, the ones who succeed and the ones who don't, The ones who succeed are the ones who will not tolerate living in this gaga world of vagueness. Take the trouble to actually understand it for yourself. And in particular, understand simple things deeply. Understand simple things deeply, the heart of things. Let me give you a story about this. A few years ago, a friend of mine who is an international virtuoso in trumpet playing, he's one of the best trumpet players in the entire world. And he was invited here to the University of Texas to debut one of his pieces. And he's an old friend of mine from college days, before he was famous, by the way. And so he came to UT, and UT, by the way, has an absolutely marvelous music school. So he was invited. He lives in Germany, came from Germany, came to here. He stayed at my house. And while he was here, he was invited to give a master class in trumpet. And I said, could I come along? What is a master class? I've never been to a master class. He said, sure, come along. So I had never been to a master class. Have any of you seen a master class? You know what it is? A few of you have? Yeah. So this is something that happens in the music world. So I said, could I come along? He said, yes. So I come along with him to this master class. And here's the way it was. He was introduced at the front of the room here, and there were about 20 people in the room, and these were all either faculty members or students of trumpet performance, about 20 people altogether. And there was a piano there with an accompanist. And he said, he was introduced, and they all knew him, and it was sort of like introducing Tiger Woods to give a lesson in how to putt or something like that. I mean, it was really pretty good. So they were all, oh yeah, this guy. And anyway, so he said, who is the first? I would have said victim. He said student, and so student comes down. Let's say it's Bob. I've forgotten the name. Bob comes down and says, Tony says, what are you going to play for me today? And Bob says, I'm going to play the third movement of the Rachmaninoff, whatever it was, some fancy thing. And proceeds to play incredible stuff. I mean, really amazingly good stuff. And by the way, this guy is a trumpet performance major Ph.D. candidate, meaning he's going to make his living playing the trumpet. That's going to be his profession. So he plays this virtuosic stuff, high notes, fast notes. It's really amazing. And then Tony says, after 3 or 4 minutes, he stops him. He says, well, that was very good, very good. Let me give you some pointers. And he gives him some pointers, purse your lips this way and use your stomach, and, make it more musical in this way, things that you'd expect. And then he said to Bob, he said, how long do you spend practicing the basic exercises that apparently every trumpet player plays? Basically scales, And the guy says, well, I warm up for 5 minutes with them, and then I start to practice. And they practice several hours a day, by the way. And so Tony says, well, you might spend some more time on the exercises. Doesn't make a big deal of it. Bob says, fine, I'll do it. Sits down. Ann comes up, next player. Same thing. She plays this virtuosic stuff. It's great. He gives her some pointers, and then he says, how much time do you spend playing the exercises? 5 minutes, and then I go on. He says, you might spend some more time. Same thing, sits down. 4 people are treated this way. It's a 2-hour deal. 4 people are treated in this way. At the end of it, he says, are there any questions? I always have questions. I raise my hand. Tony, why did you keep telling these people to play exercises? They're great players. Didn't you hear them? And he said, oh, let me show you. He said, Bob, would you come back down? Bob comes back down. He was the first player. Bob comes back down, and Tony says, Bob, would you please play this exercise for me? And Bob proceeds to play the exercise. So we've only heard this virtuosic music. And Bob now plays the exercise. Da, 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 da. Some very simple thing. It sounds very childish. And Tony says, could I borrow your trumpet? I'm thinking to myself, Tony, you're giving a trumpet lesson, bring a trumpet. But apparently he didn't think of that, Could I borrow your trumpet? So the guy gives him his trumpet, and Tony says, okay. He doesn't say anything. Tony proceeds to play that exercise. He hasn't touched the trumpet before this in the lesson. He plays the exercise. Every note sounds like a gorgeous thing. That exercise becomes the most beautiful music you've ever heard. Every note rings like a bell. He makes the shape of the phrase so gorgeous that it's something that you'd want to listen to, just that exercise. It's gorgeous. It was completely clear that the difference between the actual international virtuoso and these wonderful beginning players, not beginning players, advanced players, but not international virtuosos, the difference happened not at their ability to play the high fast notes incredibly well, but instead at their ability to master the basics, to be so controlled, to do it so efficiently. And Tony explained it himself. If you can be so efficient and so beautiful in making these phrases, then when you do this fast virtuosic stuff, then you can do it with control and nuance and make it even more beautiful. So that was a wonderful lesson. And I think it's a lesson that you can personally use in your everyday experience, in your experience with school. What do you personally know? What do you know? I think the magic, and the word magic was used, both these people used magic, and I'm going to use the magic too, the word magic, because I think there is magic. But to me, the magic is the ability for each one of you personally, to become far better than you imagine you ever could be. Like the story of Mary at the beginning, who could do things that were way harder than you ever imagined. And by the way, I forgot to say, the answer she came up with, I thought maybe I'd given her a hint somehow, inadvertently, winking or something. No, the answer she came up with was not the way I had ever seen it proved before. And I wrote the textbook, and there's a standard way to do it, and that's not the one she came up with. So I knew I wasn't giving her hints. You can personally have that experience. Do the steps that allow yourself to flourish. And those steps include actually understanding things. Don't just nod when you don't understand things. Admit what you know and what you don't know. You know, make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. Be honest with yourself. I loved the phrase in Dean Young's poem, "The world is 65% if." Wasn't that one of the lines? 65% if. And the if that I'd like to advertise is this if. If you personally take these steps, if you personally take the step of understanding simple things deeply in everything that you're learning, what can you do with a blank piece of paper? Do you actually know the stuff? That's a great way to prepare for any test. If you make mistakes and look at them, if you want to write a paper, just write it down really fast, and that's a great start in getting a finished product. If you've asked yourself questions, what is the real question here? You're constantly questioning. If you see the flow of ideas, if you take those steps, you will personally become those brilliant thinkers and those great geniuses and produce that wonderful work and live a brilliant life, a life that you can personally really revel in and flourish with. So my 65% if is hoping that all of you, 100%, will embrace the idea of making of yourselves the most creative product you will ever make, and that is yourselves. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to be the fourth person in a row to say magic. I think this was magic tonight. And the only thing that comes to mind is, shoot, this is over, or words to that effect. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, all of you.